Hello and welcome to the Berean Book Club podcast with your hosts Francois Poe and Conrad Rieder, the podcast where we discuss books written by saints both dead and alive to see what they can teach us and the church today and hopefully spur us on in our love for Christ. We're so glad you're joining us.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Berean Book Club. This is episode 3 for the year. We're shooting in the daytime again for the first time in over a year, I think. We've been at night for the last while.
Yeah.
So it's good to see you properly, Brew.
Yeah, it is. It feels like we've got stuff achter mekaar.
Yeah. We had said in the previous episode that we were going to be looking at Can We Trust the Gospels? But we made a last-minute decision to change the book for this month and rather shoot an episode on something quite a bit older and maybe a little bit more classic.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I'm not mistaken, you've recently done a bit of a talk on friendship at your church, and as you were doing that, you were reading this, and I read this a while ago, and so we thought, well, let's have a chat about The Inner Ring. It's an essay by C.S. Lewis, and as a classic evangelical, we all love C.S. Lewis. And so, yeah, we thought it would be good to just discuss this a bit as we've been thinking about friendship and how to think about that from a biblical point of view. It's quite elusive in our day and age to have good friendships, to experience that ourselves and to see it in the world around us. And so it's a topic to really think a bit deeper about. It's underdeveloped in our conscience, I think, as a church. And so I'm quite excited for it. With Lewis, it's always a bit deeper than on the surface.
Yes.
It takes a bit more time to try and get behind what he's trying to say. Maybe we're familiar with kind of his other works like Chronicles of Narnia, and it's all about the imagery that's communicating to us, but he's actually very thoughtful and very specific in how he writes and kind of dissects society very, very well. And today's essay that we're going to be working through definitely does that. It dissected my heart right in the middle, and I'm pretty much on board where he is in terms of the issue he addresses. So maybe as we start, The Inner Ring, what is the inner ring that he speaks about?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. The entire essay is really trying to unpack this idea of the inner ring and show why it may be a dangerous thing and what a solution or alternative might be to how we think about it. But I think the best way to explain it and how he kind of explains it is as an invisible hierarchy that exists in social kind of circles.
Yes.
He starts off the essay with a bit of an illustration from Tolstoy, which I have no idea who Tolstoy is or what. I mean, I've heard the name before, but I don't know. But he's got this little excerpt of a scene. It's like a military scene where there's generals and cardinals and lieutenants, and there's this official hierarchy which exists between them. But as he describes this scene between these three guys, he shows how the way in which Tolstoy writes, there's actually an invisible hierarchy, which is completely different to the hierarchy, the official hierarchy of general, colonel, lieutenant. I think it goes in that order. And this invisible hierarchy is so strong that it can actually overpower the official hierarchy, where a general might be at the top of the official hierarchy and everyone else bow to him. This invisible hierarchy that exists between being in or being in the inner ring has the power even to, at a social level, kind of flip the switch.
Overrule the
Precisely,
There are other.
precisely. Overrule the official hierarchy. That's maybe a bit of an arbitrary example for us. Lewis is obviously writing kind of post-war time and that kind of stuff. Those are some foreign concepts to us in terms of generals and cardinals and lieutenants and that kind of stuff. But so the inner ring for him is this invisible thing where you will know in a social situation when you are a part of it. You'll be fully aware in a social situation when you're not a part of it. They speak in the same language. You speak of us and we. In an exclusive way, you speak of they and them. He's got this whole thing. If you want to be in, you speak of them. If you are in, you speak of we and us. But it's this invisible social hierarchy that exists that everyone knows in the room, in the moment. You're either in or you're either out.
Yeah, and he says it's characterized by this. There's this slang that only the insiders actually are aware of. There's maybe nicknames that get thrown around. The conversation that happens it's clear to everyone who's in, but those on the outside can't follow it so easily. So these are all marks of being on the inside and being part of this inner ring. And he wants you to know that these inner rings exist everywhere. It's not just as we think about kind of the military and how the military relate to one another. He says in every industry, wherever you are, you always get the insiders and the outsiders, those who are in the inner ring and those who are outside, and then those who are on the periphery of this ring. They're nearly in, but not yet. And at this point, when you listen to what Lewis is saying, with our experience, we feel this is like true, right? We've all been in situations where we are looking around at the group of people we're standing in, and we recognize, I'm not part of what's going on here. I'm here. I've been maybe invited, but I'm not part of what's happening. I'm completely outside of this. I actually feel outside. They make me feel outside. But the flip side is also true. You've also recognized at times that everything's just clicking. You're speaking and everyone's got the same language, and at that moment you look at the people in the room and you recognize that person, we've completely excluded them without trying necessarily, but he's on the outside. Yes. And so we felt both being on the outside and being on the inside, or just being on the fringe and so close to being there. And Lewis wants to just define that there's this inner ring that exists, right? And it doesn't necessarily correspond to the traditional hierarchies that we see in work and in society. And if we don't have eyes to actually just recognize that first and foremost, we're not going to be able to understand what he goes on to say. And so for Lewis, as he recognizes this inner ring, he then goes on to kind of lay out the purposes for why he's actually writing this essay. In just after the war, Lewis is writing to this society and kind of how they're going to rebuild after the war and what they're going to be busy with, and he wants them to recognize the inner ring exists, but more than that this desire to be in the inner ring is one of the strongest desires that exists and will drive you if you don't die to it. Yeah. And so as he lays that out, what are kind of the two things that he wants to achieve in warning you against this desire to be in the inner ring?
Yeah, Lewis doesn't just want you to know that this thing exists. He wants you to know that this is probably one of the major driving forces behind why we do most of what we do.
Yeah.
Which is an arbitrary thought. I think at one stage he compares it to some other guys who say we might be driven by sexual desire primarily, or we're driven by reward, or I think he goes to like Freud and Marx, and he says like, you think society is driven by economics, or you think society is driven by sexual desire or eroticism. And he's like, actually, I think it's driven by this desire to want to be in. And so he says, I believe that in all men's lives at certain points, and in many men's lives at all periods between infancy and extreme old age, one of the most dominant elements is the desire to be inside the local ring and the terror of being left outside. He doesn't just want us to know that this thing exists. He wants us to know it's probably one of the biggest driving forces behind what we do. And he's kind of he's got two reasons, he says, why he wants us to stay away from these things. Why he wants to convince us that pursuing this desire is probably not a good thing.
Yeah.
The first reason, he says, is that there are few things which have the power to turn someone who's not yet a bad man into a bad man. His argument is basically that this desire to be in is such a strong desire in it that it will move us in certain moments to do things we ordinarily would not have done or might not have done, just for the sake of having that experience of being in.
Yeah.
They'll happen at like small incremental moments, he says. So it's not like going to be one big decision, you do this massive like initiatory task and that's going to be bad, and then you're going to be in and you're going to be like a badass. That's not what he's saying, but he's saying like there'll be little moments along the way where you won't even always realize that this is asking you to do something that maybe you ordinarily would not have done.
Yeah, yeah.
And in retrospect, he says, once you get to the end and you're actually in, which is elusive, but we'll get there. Once you're actually in, you'll realize you've become a scoundrel.
Yeah, that's the word. That's the word he uses. Yeah, and I think that's a profound thing to recognize that he lays out for us, is that kind of becoming what he calls a scoundrel, or we'd say like just a bad person, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen through someone gives you a bribe and now you're like a criminal. It's small decisions to be in that compounds over years and years and years and years. And before you know it, the trail that's left behind you of the people you've hurt and the people you've disregarded, who could have been your friends, who could have you have gained so much for and given to, that's just left behind just in order to be in this elusive, never fulfilling desire to be on the inside. And I thought that's very powerful. If I think to myself that there's always the temptation, especially as Christians, for us to be in and to die to certain, or to disregard certain truths that we hold in Scripture. If I want to fit in at my kid's school and we have a social at night, there's this temptation to play down my Christianness and to have a few more beers with them just to be in. Because I think once I'm in, I'm going to be able to be there and have the influence or whatever. And just like that, my desire to be in, it's not made me a bad person per se, but it has driven me to act in ways that is already contrary to what I hold to in my Christian faith. And that happens once, and the next time you're there, now you've felt the intimacy of being let in by the group. And okay, now we're going for a weekend away because all the men are going away, and then it's small stupid things like this, but I think they do add up, and it becomes a very strong driving force in our lives. And I think we would do very well to take serious what he says here, to delve down into our hearts and think what is driving me. And we know this is not just sex, this is not just money, or that's a superficial. he makes the case. That's a superficial
Yeah.
reading of our emotions. And at times it is there, and it's not like it's never an issue. But deep down, he's saying, no, you want to belong, and that desire to belong is going to drive you. And if you're not careful, it's going to drive you to do things that will be contrary to who you are, and are specifically as Christians contrary to who Christ has called us to be. And I found that challenging and eye-opening and a reminder to persevere, for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, Lewis has a way of just, he's particularly insightful. It feels like in almost everything, but this is one of those moments where it's such a simple thing to say, and we all know this, like it doesn't happen overnight. It's slowly but surely, and it's little seemingly insignificant things. But when you look back after relentlessly pursuing this desire to belong, what does the man look like who's done that for like 50, 60, 70 years, who's at many junctures of his life kind of just let small, seemingly insignificant things go for the sake of being in and belonging. He really shows well how this desire, relentlessly pursuing it, has the ability to turn someone who's not yet a scoundrel into a scoundrel. So, I mean, that's his first caution of why this is not a desire to relentlessly pursue. But his second caution is perhaps the most insightful to me, and that is that it's a never-ending search. You'll never really get what you want. And I want to read some like sections here just of how he makes this argument, because I don't think I can put it in better words than he does. But he says, as long as you are governed by that desire, that is the desire to be in the inner ring, you'll never get what you want. You're trying to peel an onion. If you succeed, there will be nothing left. Until you conquer the fear of being an outsider you will remain. The circle cannot have from within the same charm that it had from outside. By the very act of admitting you, it has lost its magic. You merely wanted to be in, and that is a pleasure that cannot last. The point that he's making is the kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, is being in. And he says once you're in, you no longer need to be in because you're in, but that desire to then be into something else is what's going to drive you. It's the desire is going to remain because the one thing that you wanted to be in, you no longer have.
Yeah.
The charm, I think this is probably the most brilliant part here for me. The charm, he says, from outside is not the same charm as from within.
Yeah.
It's incredibly attractive, this like unknown, group that you want to be in. But once you're in, all of that charm almost instantly is gone. And so the pursuit,
almost always at that point recognizes that there's an inner ring within this inner ring as well, right? There's always that elusive next inner ring that you'd like to then be part of.
Yeah, and so his second caution is that is exactly that. It will be relentless. It'll almost devour you, because you'll never really be in. There'll always be something else to be in on.
He says there, until you conquer the fear of being an outsider you will remain. And I thought that was particularly potent. It's in a certain sense his answer to this is, well, if you're going to be pursuing this, you'll basically die pursuing it and never experience intimacy, or belonging in any real sense. You have to die to the fear of being an outsider. And again, as Christians, we know this to be true, but it's so difficult to do. Everywhere I go, I fear being on the outside. I fear not being part of the group who is in the know, whether that's here at church or whether that's at school or whether that's wherever it is, whether that's in our theological circles. I want to know what's going on in evangelicalism so I can just be on the inside and not be on the outside. And at times more driven by being in than actually staying true to God and His Word, right? And it's a very strong driver that you're almost blind towards unless you really take the time to see how your desire to fit in, your desire to be on the inside, drives a lot of the things you do, and brings a lot of temptation with it. I can think of many times in my life where there's been a temptation to not stand up for what's right, to be in. And not only just to not stand up for the truth, there's more fear to be now put out because you stand up for it. It's not standing up for the truth that's so difficult. It's the consequence of that, right? Oh, you're not with us? That's fine. Now you're on the outside and you lose that belonging, that intimacy. Oh, you don't hold to this position? Okay, that's great. We can be friends, but you're not part of us, right? And again, it's such a strong reminder for us to think through, like, what is driving us? Who is the one that we're ultimately seeking to serve, and the danger of kind of making men and their view of us our masters.
Yeah, I think his solution in this sense is maybe unexpected. We'd want him. I would at least want him to, like, explore belonging a bit, and how that plays itself out in the gospel. But it's unexpected that he goes, this can actually be an inordinate desire, something not to be fulfilled in something else, but actually something that we need to, by the Spirit, put to death.
Yeah.
This relentless longing to want to be in. And I think the beauty just in how he ends the essay is that once we've been able to do that, once we've been able to stop pursuing the desire to want to be in just for the sake of being in, he says that's where, in a paradoxical sense, we'll really experience being in. And I suppose that's true at so many junctures of the Christian life, but where you've got to give up what you want in order to gain it in a weird way.
Paradoxical way of the Christian life. Yeah.
So as soon as you stop pursuing wanting to be in the inner ring, and you so in the context of work, you pursue your work just for the sake of your work, for the sake of excellence in doing your work well, you will find, he says, that you accidentally become part of an inner ring of those who pursue excellence in their work.
Yeah.
And there, he says, you will find friendship.
Yeah.
And so what he's basically saying is you have to put to death that desire to want to be in the inner ring, and then accidentally you'll end up in an inner ring, but then you'll end up in a ring that you're not there for the sake of being in, but you're there accidentally.
Yeah. No, I that's precisely what I think he's saying. It's like it will be a byproduct of you pursuing not the inner ring, but actually just And as I'm still pondering this, if we all take some time to think about people in our lives, we can identify those. I can think of Christian men who aren't in. They're not the people that everyone looks to for leadership. They're not the people that everyone kind of admires from I won't say a worldly perspective, but they're not the guys people talk about. But everyone knows them as faithful teachers of God's word that are upright and pure of heart and kind of serving their congregation. And you think to yourself, they haven't walked the road of trying to fit in. They've just been faithful with what God has given them. And after doing that for 20, 30, 40 years, they are known by that. And not because they've climbed the ladder and somehow they're way above where their character is or their gifting for that matter. And you're like, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And you see after 30, 40, 50 years that these are men and women who aren't ruled by this desire to want to be in it. They've got a greater king.
Yes.
They've got something else which they've bowed the knee to. They've learned to die to this. And that is beautiful.
Maybe one thing as we come to the end of the episode, Lewis is speaking in a certain sense here. I can be completely mistaken, but it seems like he's speaking to society as they're seeking to rebuild after the war. But we are standing this side of history, and we've gone through a lot since then. And as Christians now, we're reading this, what Lewis says. I walked away wondering what are the tools that Lewis. I'm wondering, does Lewis give us any tools to really bring about this heart change that he proposes? Because I left wondering, you've shown me how strong this desire is to be to people pleasing, right? But how am I going to put that to death? And I don't know if he actually gives me a real solution to that.
No, I don't think he does, and I don't think his intention is to do so. I think up front, he seems to kind of like be joking a bit with his audience, saying like, you've asked a middle-aged moralist to come and talk to you, to give you advice, he says, and a middle-aged moralist is only going to give you advice about three things: the world, the flesh, and the devil, he says. And then he goes, I'm not here to talk about the devil. And he says, it seems like he's talking to young people, like students.
Yes.
Because I think he says, I know you guys are young, but I think by now you know enough about your flesh, I would hope.
Yes, he does say that.
But he's like, I'm here to talk to you about the world. And so his intention is clear from the start. It's speaking outside of us. This is, and he looks into our hearts a little bit there. So in a sense, he does address the flesh, maybe in our tendencies towards these things. But he's not trying to kind of, he's not trying to delve into the inner workings of how we apply the solution. He's really just trying to make an observation here and advise these people, whether they're young or not, to beware of this desire that's in their hearts and in the world around them. I mean, we were talking a little bit before the episode, and we don't have time to go into this, but I think there's some really interesting conversations to be had comparing his essay here to his chapter in the 4 Loves on Friendship. There's just some interesting kind of
overlap. And trying to figure out how they relate to one another, because he holds friendship up as a great blessing that God has given us, and he holds it in very high regard, right? But there seems to be, I think both of us are just wondering, what's the interplay between this being in that friendship automatically produces, and the desire to be in, and how that relates to one another.
Perhaps that's the best way to distinguish what's going on here. Is he's almost indirectly painting a picture of a shallow friendship, or a worldly friendship, but he and at the end he gives a glimpse that this is what true friendship might look like, but he doesn't kind of go in there. In 4 Loves he does a little bit more, and so maybe what's the right way? Accidentally, this is the negative side of friendship, or the shallow side of friendships, and 4 Loves is a little bit more digging into some of the positive parts of it. And that's why we feel we're left wanting, like, I'm with you, but how do we move forward from it? perhaps as we end the episode, he hasn't gone into the positive kind of ways of playing this out. How would you answer some of the questions around that? What are some tools that we do find in Scripture, that we find in the Gospel, which help us to almost apply what he's putting forward here?
Look, there's lots of passages you can probably go to, but I do think this is a question about identity that really drives us forward. And so I think the way in which, if we maybe listen to Paul, the advice Paul would give is like, hey, go read Ephesians 1. This is who you are. Okay, you have been chosen, you've been redeemed, you've been forgiven by the blood, you've been given the Spirit as a guarantee of your inheritance. So this is who you are. This is your new identity as a Christian, and now he's going to challenge you to live that out. And so it gives you a strong foundation for your fellowship with God and with fellow man, without it's a way to heal that desire to fit in by recognizing whose you are and the power of his Spirit that is in work in your heart as you seek to live this out. And so, I mean, you go forward, and we'll definitely still be tempted by this, but I do think the New Testament gives us the grounds to recognize that the Spirit that raised Christ from the dead is the same Spirit that dwells within us, and the Spirit's desires for us to put to death the flesh and the sin in our hearts and
be who we are.
Yeah. And so I think that's where the way it leads us. Maybe also just to actually confess that, right? If you confess your sins, he's faithful and just to forgive.
Yeah.
This is sin, right? This is not just, we're a bit bad. Sometimes I'm driven by my desire to please men and not God. Lord, forgive me that this is what drives me. Will you give me a new heart? Will your Spirit empower me to be driven by pleasing you and not man? And so I do think the New Testament gives us more than enough to deal with that. It's just deep, and heart change doesn't happen quickly.
That's a good answer.
So let's continue to encourage one another while it is still today.
Yes, the New Testament's flowing out of you.
I just want to be in, so I'm using the right terminology. So, thanks for listening. For those of you who are still with us, we really enjoy doing this, and we love hearing from you. So if you have listened to this and there's something that's stuck out for you, just tell us. Maybe you're at church with us or wherever. Get in touch with us. We'd love that.
Yeah, we would love that. We're not going to drop our promise that we're going to cover and have a conversation about can we trust the Gospels. So is that what is up next month?
Yeah.
All right. So next month we're going to be looking at can we trust the Gospels by
Peter Williams. Yeah. And on TGC right now, it's a free. It's a free download.
I actually saw that.
So if you want to grab that, it's March right now, 2024. So maybe till the end of March, you can go and grab that for free and work your way through it. It is an excellent resource as you're thinking about just the critiques that gets leveled against the New Testament and its reliability, especially the Gospels. And so, do pick it up. And next month we'll have a conversation about that. So, thanks for joining us. Grace and peace. Cheers, fam. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Berean Book Club podcast. We'd love for you to head over to your podcasting app and give us a review and subscribe to the podcast. It will help us so much. This podcast was brought to you by BTI Stellenbosch. BTI Stellenbosch exists to bring theology to the church. If you want to find out more information, you can head over to btistellenbosch.com. Until next time.